So let's welcome our speakers. First, we have Dr. Aparna Joshi, the Arnold Family Professor of Management at the Smeal College of Business at the Pennsylvania State University. We also have Shelly McNamara, the Chief Equality and Inclusion Officer and Executive Vice President at P&G, and Phillip Youmans, an award-winning filmmaker whose searing feature Burning Cane debuted at Tribeca last spring. We have so much to talk about today. I really can't think of a better time to talk about diversity, inclusion, managing change, and the Gen Z generation. The Gen Z generation, born after 1996, leading edge of racial and societal change. According to census data, the Gen Z generation will be non-white majority within the next 6 years. 24 million of the eldest Gen Zers were eligible to vote in this election. And half of the eldest Gen Zers said they or someone they knew had lost a job or taken a pay cut due to COVID, which is just simply remarkable. And so when we think about workplaces, we think about managing change and bringing in new people into our workspace, it's probably smart to kind of first think about what values do these new employees, these new people bring to them to work. And so, Philip, I'm going to start off with you. You're our resident Gen Zer. What values are important to your cohort, to your Gen Zers, when you think about coming into the workplace?
I think the biggest thing for us is making sure that we always feel heard and seen, and that the individual is always retained and respected, no matter what the conversation is. I think people have this idea about Gen Zers that that we're only looking for when's the vacation time, when's the next leave, all these kinds of things. But in truth, I think we're one of the generations that really see that life doesn't revolve around going into the job and then coming home. I think we also look at our lives in a less sort of rigidly structured way, in a way I think is more beneficial to our mental well-being. And I think that's really at the focus of what Gen Zers think about, that and the individual, and making sure that the individual is always respected in whatever space that they're in. So I think being seen, being heard, being respected, being able to live who they are, being able to be who they are in their workspace is the biggest thing that Gen Zers want and want to see. They want to feel that same inclusivity for everyone that they work with as well. I think in a lot of ways, the sort of, consistently progressive, feeling amongst Gen Zers is something that you can feel in the workspace as well.
Harn, I'm going to go over to you. When you talk with your students about what's important to them, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to echo a lot of what Philip's just said. I think there's certainly this idea of being heard. There's also, I think, an increasing, on average, a growing focus on diversity and inclusion and an awareness of social justice causes. Although, I see myself on this panel as slightly having a slightly different vantage point, because we see Gen Z talent from the supply side. So we have students coming in between the ages of 18 to 22, coming in from high schools and their family institutions. It's not a monolithic group either, though. So I just want to emphasize. So although there is a growing awareness of social justice and an interest in these issues, I also see, there is a minority that needs some more convincing. Perhaps, coming from Pennsylvania, we represent a wide array of urban, rural, political views, huge political divides. So I think I'm not saying this as a way to color the conversation, but just to say that this is not a monolithic group from a values standpoint, especially values that pertain to diversity and inclusion. So basically, I think there is room for institutions like myself to continue to shape the supply of Gen Z talent around issues of social justice and social justice causes. And I look to institutions like P&G, for example, to create the demand for diversity and inclusive leadership. So I'm looking at it from a more supply and demand side of Gen Z talent as being an educator in a business school. And I see there's a wide spectrum of views, not all of which are perfectly aligned with a broader vision of diversity and inclusion. There is minority views also that pertain to questions around, is there systemic racism, or is meritocracy a myth? uh, so in dealing with students walking into our educational institutions from a wide array of socioeconomic and family backgrounds, I think it's really a mix. But I also see a lot of interest in issues around diversity and inclusion and wanting to play a leadership role in that space.
Well, so Phillip, you wanted to jump in?
Well, no, I mean, I think what she's saying is very, very true. I think I think we're sort of, the masses of Gen Z are progressive, but just like any generation, just like any group of people, there are always going to be people that are exceptions to that rule, and Gen Z is not immune to that. So no, I echo what she said for sure.
And I just wanted to say,
Shelly.
I say this, sorry, as just to round off, just as an invitation, I think, to all of us here to be aware, because being where we are today, being aware and vigilant for the need to continue to nurture values, I think, as well. So I'll stop.
So Shelly, that's a lot for managers who are now in the forefront of leading change, right? When you're at P&G and you're trying to work with your peers who are now thrust into these leadership roles, many of whom didn't think they were going to be in leadership roles, what are you hearing? What really, frankly, just takes your breath away when you sit down with your peers and talk with them?
So P&G, so for context, right? P&G is a company that has operations in more than 70 countries around the world, and we have about 100,000 employees. So we are a diverse company. We're a consumer goods company, so we are also very focused on serving the world's consumers, right? So the work of diversity, equality, and inclusion is core. It's built into our strategy. So it's not this additional thing that we sort of set along the side. And right now, as you say, we are encountering a generation of employees for whom this work and this topic is really, really important, right? So the conversation that I'm having with my peers and with our leaders at P&G is that the expectations of leadership are high, and they're accelerating in this space because this generation is very demanding. They expect equality, and where they don't see it and they don't feel it, they expect us to have a plan to achieve it. And I think it's it's a reasonable expectation.
Oh, we did a poll. Actually, we did a social media poll, and asking what do we think Gen Zers want in the workplace, and we found 20% of the respondents said that Gen Zers are interested in environmental footprint, 24% are interested in D&I, and 55% are interested in flex hours. Phillip, how does that sit with you? Is that about right? Is that what your generation is really interested in? Is there something else that is missing? That the poll didn't quite capture?
I can't lie to you. The poll is kind of funny just because, like, you think about it, it's most likely not filled out entirely by Gen Zers, because I think in a lot of ways, like I said, there's this myth that all Gen Zers are coming forward to the table with in these workspaces is when's our break time? When's the next vacation day? All that is that's not true. I think all those things are important regardless, wondering when, maternity leave, a man and a woman will have, or whoever may have, and wondering when their break time is. All that stuff is important, all that stuff is super important. Knowing what kind of work conditions you're getting into, knowing the sort of safety and integrity of the work environment you're getting into is super important. But I don't believe that flex hours and conditions are more important to Gen Zers than diversity and inclusion. And because of that, I have to say that I do believe that that poll was not filled out entirely by Gen Zers. And I think that's the reason why. It's that perception of Gen Z, that perception that we're entitled and are so privileged by definition, and that we expect so many things. But in truth, all the things that we expect are things that should be, in truth, given, a given. Respect of the individual, people being able to live who they are, be who they are 110% in their workspace should be a given. People having the time that they need to take care of their children, to go home and have a life and relax and not put everything into, their 9 to 5 should be something that should be provided. A healthy workspace with enough natural, enough to keep your mood up, enough time to, have your lunch, enough time to, all these kinds of things are important in creating a healthy work environment that is conducive with a healthy state of mind. And a healthy state of mind, in my eyes, in terms of everything that I've ever done, has always been what brings forth the best work. When people feel like they're in an open, and I'm just thinking about my sets, like when I'm on a project, I try to cultivate the most sort of loving, open, friendly, creative environment where everyone can feel like they can chime in with an idea, speak their mind, speak their piece, because that is conducive to me with good art, with a productive environment, and I think that kind of trickles in to other work environments as well. So I'm going to say, I don't think that was filled out by Gen Zers, and that's my case for it.
So I'm here, Karen.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's an intersection between these two conversations, right, around, what I'm thinking about is we just made a new policy shift in the parental leave space specifically, right? And so the shift that we're making is that we are moving to a global framework, first time global, not local, but global framework, that around the world, all P&G employees that become new parents will have 8 weeks of paid leave. And it's not tied to gender, it's not tied to orientation. And then if you're the biological mother, then you get an additional 6 weeks. And so it's an incredible shift for us, and a really important one, because as Philip's talking about, right, it is about human beings that want to have the opportunity, the space, the time to do things like be a parent, to have flexibility. And for us, it's also really important policy, right, in the specifically the equality and inclusion space, because it says parenting is not defined by gender. And then we know there's some benefits of that as well, because we know that when men have the opportunity to do caretaking, right, a couple of really important things happen. They're more empathetic and understanding of what it takes to do that work. So as women come back off maternity leave historically, men have not had that experience, right? And we also know that the research also supports that for women, that when their partner has an opportunity to be there, they get psychological benefits, emotional benefits from that as well, and it's good for the family to have more shared parenting. So policy changes are important. Policy changes in this space are incredibly important, particularly those who enable human beings to experience themselves and their lives more wholly.
And so a manager who may be befuddled, who has a Phillip standing in front of him or her, and is asked, "What's your parental leave policy?" May not fully understand why a young Gen Z male employee is asking that question. And what that manager may be missing is that for Gen Zers, that's a very fundamental question, regardless of how young they may be and their gender. That is a very basic question and very important to them, whether or not they have children at this moment. Is that right, Phillip?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is. I also think a huge thing about my generation also is that we are trying to create the most, just in terms of our perceptions of each other. I mean, I don't even, with all of my friends, whether they be, male, female, gender nonconforming, whoever they may be, I feel like there's just an equal look that we have on everything and everybody that I think is just unmatched by any other generation. And because of that fact, I think that we are not out here trying to draw any distinctions on gender or anything that divides us, anything that we cannot control as an individual. I don't think Gen Zers are ever trying to divide ourselves into that. And I also think we're of a generation and of a time where we understand, and us as like I said, as the partner of somebody, however they identify, wants to be a part of something like seeing the first couple months of a kid growing up, or you know, those first moments. Like it doesn't, I don't think drawing any sort of gender distinction on the importance of those kinds of things has any place for a Gen Zer.
Aparna, I have a question. Actually, we have a question from a member of our audience, and they're kind of married. We just got a question in, and we have also a question from someone named Leslie about the lasting changes that may be coming out of this moment. Are you anticipating with the work that you're doing with your students? Are you seeing any trends of lasting change? Are you are you are you anticipating from any of the work that you're doing any pushback? Is that something that you're charting or you're concerned about?
Yeah, I think a lot of work we are now focusing on is pushback from what I like to call dominant groups. And these groups, not just among Gen Zers, but also at higher levels in organizations. So, on average, as I said, I think although there is a greater awareness, a greater need to be involved in allyship and in social justice causes, there are pockets of resistance. I think at all levels, a growing tendency to perhaps go back to traditional values or more socially conservative norms to deal with the changing uncertainty of the workplace. And the world in general. So I do expect us to be vigilant and in our research find ways to reach out to groups who don't feel they're part of this bigger conversation around social justice and inclusion. Whether that's among Gen Zers or among more established ranks in organizations. I think that's where the moving the needle forward on diversity and inclusion is going to lie in those pockets of resistance. So it's, as I said, I think an invitation to our leaders, Gen Zers in the audience and here on the panel, to be aware, vigilant, and try to bring people on board to this broader agenda for social justice and inclusion that I think companies like P&G are on the forefront of dealing on the demand side, like I said. So I think this is something that's an ongoing issue. We should not be relaxed or complacent about the need to continue to do that and push for it at all levels.
So Shelly, what policies and basic practices have you seen are effective? Is it around transparency? Is it around holding people accountable? What do you see working?
Well, one of the things that we did recently was reshape and rename our work in this space. So our overarching strategy is one that we call equality and inclusion. And it's a shift from diversity and inclusion as the overarching framework that may sound subtle. It was a really important choice because we chose those words for a couple of important reasons. One is what you're poking at, which is Aparna, everybody needs to see themselves in this, because this is actually about humanity, right? This is about unleashing human beings to be their best selves, to give their best selves, and to grow and develop, right? And have a full life for themselves, impact the communities they're in, the companies they're a part of. So why those words, and what does it mean? For us, we wanted to focus on outcomes. And so what we said is, what is it that we want in this work? And over the last few months, we've been engaging in saying equality is the experience of being equal. We want that for everyone at P&G. We want it for all 100,000 of our employees. And we also want inclusion, which is a feeling of belonging, right? And then you have to do the difficult work of saying, what do you need to do to get there? Because the data will tell us, right, that not everybody does experience, right, and feel equal, right? You can tell that by the numbers. So if you bring in a certain number of, men and women as an example, and then over time, over a 10 or 15-year period, you look at the levels in the organization and where are women and men, or where are the diverse people, and you see that the data tells you something's, it doesn't feel equal, it doesn't look equal. You have work to do. When you take organization surveys and people share with you stories that they don't feel like they can be their whole self at work, right? Because they still hear jokes that diminish people who are in the LGBTQ community. We have more work to do. So that's what we've done. We've been really clear in articulating three things. One is a clear aspiration that says we want this for all. I'll also tell you that we are also learning our way to invite in the dominant culture to be a part of the conversation, to get some of their own capability building and insight and learning, about, as an example, on gender. What is it to be a man in this moment? what was it to be a man in the moment of, in the heart of the moment of Me Too? And then what can we all do to help each other feel more supported, more included, more unleashed? And you have to do the hard work though, like to get there. So that's what we've done. We've articulated it as a set of outcomes. And then, as we know about Gen Zers and many people certainly at my company, they expect action. So we also have specific plans to get there, right? And things like representation. It's important. And again, for us as a consumer goods company, it's our business choice to reflect the consumers we serve. So when we make statements and set aspirations, which we have, to say we want to be, gender equal at every level of management in the company, 50%. We've been doing work over the last 5 years in particular. We are now at 48% of our managers are women. That didn't just happen, right? It happened because we said we have intentionality and we have specificity. And then about a year ago, we articulated another one, aspiration, which was 40% multicultural in the US. Again, not just words, but an aspiration with action. So outcomes, clear aspiration, and then you have to have plans to fill it and actions. And then it's inviting in the dominant culture to learn, grow, and contribute as well.
Phillip, you said in a recent interview, you talked about shaking off the generational passage of vices, and I really loved that expression. How do you shake off? Is Shelly on the right track, shaking off the generational passage of the old way, the usual way of doing things? How do companies really and institutions really shake off the way that we've always done things, the way we've always hired, the way we've always promoted, the way we've always recruited, the way we've always retained talent? Is that something that your generation, when you walk into a new workplace, do you look around and do you really look for representation at senior levels? Does that really matter to your generation?
Definitely. Definitely. I think, again, when you think about what services a Gen Zer or what the Gen Zer is thinking about, I think you always have to go into the idea of us trying to see and trying to create an environment where everyone can feel represented, everyone can feel seen, everyone can feel heard in a way that is in no way different than anyone around them. Not enforcing any hierarchies based on, like I said, anything that a person cannot control. All of that is incredibly important. It's incredibly important in art. It's incredibly important, for young people of all kinds to be able to see themselves and see people like them and see all these kinds of things in art and film and cinema. And it's also important in a workspace, in a 9-to-5 workspace where you see other people that look like you or feel like you or think like you or any of these kinds of things. All of that is important and conducive, I think, with a productive work environment, because you feel like there's someone who also, at the end of the day, knows what you're going through. And also you can look at and see, oh, you see where they went? Bet I can get there. Clearly, it's happened, And those examples are powerful, and they should be there no matter what. Finding, gender equality or really coming to that in an executive space is dope. Like, that's amazing. That's something that needs to be pushed in other work environments, and that's incredibly important. So yeah, 100%.
Aparna, with the students that you're working with, are they asking questions that you haven't anticipated? Are they bringing into your classroom issues that are new that you really find surprising? Because these really are different times. I mean, they really is. There's just so much information coming at these students, at young people. This is the first generation that is truly digital. I mean, they know nothing but a smartphone. I mean, it really is remarkable the level of engagement that young people are that's expected. It can be almost physically overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, two things. I think one, reflecting on what Phillip's earlier said, this is not a generation looking to have a fun time. I certainly haven't gotten that impression from my students. In fact, many of them are working multiple jobs. trying to pay their tuition, and trying to be in class. So I have a lot of respect for the amount of work my students are putting in to be in class, to be heard, to learn, right? So first of all, a lot of respect for our students here at Penn State, and I'm sure at other state institutions. But also, I just wanted to say one thing that's been surprising to me and has been the interest, apart from gender and race, their interest in disabilities and even including intellectual disabilities. And I see this as a function of integrated K through 12 education that this generation has experienced. They have literally grown up with somebody in their classroom who is on the autism spectrum, who has learning disability, like this. I think what was really remarkably different for me from my generation to this new one is that this is a matter of course for them, different abilities. And I think maybe this goes back to something that the respect for different abilities has been, I think, one of the most remarkable and to me inspiring moments in my class. About gender and race, there's often pushback from some pockets. When I talk about race issues, it's a very sensitive and heavy topic. When I talk about intellectual disabilities, I have young men, they're taller, bigger than me, but tears in their eyes, coming and talking to me about a cousin who's been diagnosed on the autism spectrum, the need to understand inclusion for different abilities in the workplace. So I think that has been one remarkably, it's just been inspiring to me. I have a son on the autism spectrum myself who's 19 years old. And I have a younger son who is neurotypical. And for him, the notion that this is a difference, that this is a stigmatizing difference, is just alien. So I think that has been the most remarkable learning from my students for me.
That's Shelly. I know that you were on a panel on difference, and I find that it really fascinating. And there actually is some research data that bears that out as well. That Gen Zers across the board are more aware of a host of differences and issues that affect all populations, and seem to be uniformly interested in differences across populations than other generations, which I find is really very interesting. We had a question from another member of our audience, which is kind of interesting, and it's about burnout. And we only have like 2 minutes left, and I think it is especially perhaps this week, the notion of burnout. Is that something that you worry about for those of you who work in this space, in the professional realm, as a creative person and as an educator? Do you personally worry about your own burnout? And if so, how do you deal with that? And you have literally a minute.
No, we are made aware in classrooms. Sorry, I'll let Phillip go first. Sorry.
Okay, you got it. I'll take it last.
So I think in our classrooms, we have been made aware to provide the right resources to watch out for symptoms of depression and burnout among our students. So I definitely think we take it very seriously. Creating a safe space for talking about it is, I think, the first step that we definitely aim for in our classrooms.
Okay. And Shelly, in the professional realm?
Yeah, I mean, we're at a moment of so many things colliding together, Karen, right? So we have COVID-19, we have elevated conversation on the topic of race, we have elevated conversation on our political environment. We are divided in so many ways on paper and otherwise. So it's a tense moment. And I know in the professional realm, what we're doing is we're working to provide as much flexibility as we can for human beings to manage their lives. And that's what we need to do, because we all have different demands than we had a year ago, and they're very intense. And so we just need to give each other grace. We need to give each other time. We need to give each other flexibility. And that's what we're doing.
I appreciate that. And Phillip, you have literally 15 seconds.
Okay, word. Just reflecting that and bouncing off of that, I think the creative environment, whether film, music, art, visual art, any of that, has always been a very, very inclusive environment in comparison to industries when you think about it. But also, I'll say this, that burnout is something that I think we've been able to steer away from, because as Gen Zers, we are, I think, in large part encouraged at the change that's happening, because real change is still happening all around us. And so I do think that the burnout is something that's being subsided a little bit because of what we see going on.